Hi there, this is Josh from Literary Gladiators, and today I'm here to introduce a new tag video to the Booktube community. This tag video is called the Scholars Book Tag, and it has been inspired by my college days and how great of an impact it has had in my enthusiasm for books, reading, and literature. Here I have 10 bookish-related questions. Hopefully they're not too snobby for you. And then there's an 11th question that you could probably guess right now what it is. But let's get started into the Scholars Book Tag video, and you'll get a drift of what it's all about. And I'll leave the questions down below in the description box. First question is, which lesser-known writer do you feel more people need to read and study? And for that, I chose Robert Walser, who is a Swiss writer. He wrote Jacob von Gutten, The Walk, The Assistant. He's also written a lot of short works and poems. And he at a certain point in his life, he developed schizophrenia, and he was sent to an institution to live out his life. And while he was there, he was still writing. He was writing in this microscopic, ant-like format about random things, and it was collected into a collection called Microscripts, which I read a few years back. And he's just somebody that has a remarkable, amazing background that I think would be a great subject to examining even more. Jacob von Gutten was brilliant, and I'm planning to read The Walk sometime soon. Next one is, which well-known writer do you feel garners too much attention? Which I think it could be viewed in a negative way, but I would say that the gist of the question is an overrated writer that you feel doesn't need to be studied as much. And for that I chose William Shakespeare, which to some it's blasphemy, to others they can take it or leave it, which I honestly feel that while I think that there are so many great writers, I cannot confirm and assure that Shakespeare is the greatest writer of them all. He did a great job with his contributions to the English language, but as far as his content and his plot goes, everything was borrowed. And many of his stories within his plays were very similar to one another. You had different names, different locations, and different situations, but the gist was very similar. And then you also have the questions of what really made Shakespeare stand out, because even during his time, Gretchen from Betwixt the Books reminds me that when Shakespeare was active, it was Christopher Marlowe that was the popular playwright during that time. So I think that Shakespeare, while I think that it's necessary to look into him and the impact that he's had on the English language, I really don't think that it should be mandatory that in order to be an English or a literature major, that you absolutely have to read as much Shakespeare as possible. Next question is, a writer or work you believe will be in the canon by 2050. And I just chose 2050 because it is a year in the foreseeable future. And for that one, I chose J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series, which I feel that even if the Harry Potter series is not studied in traditional literature classes, I think that many of them will incorporate the Harry Potter series, and I also think that there will be classes specifically about the Harry Potter series and the impact that it has had on its target generation and how and why that happened to be the case. There's already classes that critically approach the Harry Potter series, but I think that it's going to be far more common and it's going to be taken far more seriously, which the classes that exist take it seriously, but I think that it's going to be elevated upward when the students, when those that were born in the 1990s were consistently followed along with the series, have a greater influence on the canon. Next question. A writer from your area, whether it be your state or your country, that you believe deserves more recognition. And for this one, I'm going to do my state of New Jersey, because I think that it would be much more fun to pick a writer that I feel deserves more recognition from my state. And I'm going to choose Allen Ginsberg. I think that Dr. Bordelon, who I had for American Literature 2 and has been on this channel, he incorporates Allen Ginsberg into his curriculum, and I think that he is such a meaningful figure to American literature, and I think that the Beats era should be taken quite seriously for the influence that it has had in challenging the boundaries that come with literature and society, and both and their interactions with one another. And then there's local authors. One of my favorite horror writers, Carlotta Holton, and then there's Rabbi Eileen Schneider, who is Ari's mom, but she writes the Rabbi Aviva Cohen series. She authored Talk Dirty Yiddish, and she was a guest contributor on here as well. And then there's so many people that I can choose. And there's definitely more that you can find in the Poets of New Jersey collection that I thought was such a great grab. Next question is, a deceased writer you felt should have won a Nobel Prize in Literature. And while there's so many that I can choose from, I'm going to choose Langston Hughes, because I think that he was such an impactful poet and writer from the Harlem Renaissance. I think that his contributions to literature during a time where the black community did not have as powerful a voice as it deserved, I think that he was among one of the writers that did such a great job being upfront and heartfelt with what it is that he was writing. His writing is honest and very grueling, but that's what makes it so special. A theme from English Beat is such a meaningful approach to the English assignment for a person like himself. And we went over Thank You Ma'am, which is a short story of his that I read back in middle school. It was just so meaningful that this young black youth, when he commits a bad deed, the woman takes things into her own hands and leaves such a magnificent impact that really gets under his skin and really makes you, the reader, just sit there and say, wow. The next question is a living writer you feel should win a Nobel Prize in Literature. And for that, I would campaign day and night for Ko-un, who is a Korean poet. I read his collection, This Side of Time, a few years ago, and it was just magnificent and brilliant. How he says so much with so little. If his poetry is half a page long, that's a long poem for him. If it's a page long, it's a rarity. But the impact that he has is just amazing. And I think that more people should definitely look into Ko-un and specifically check out his collection, The Side of Time. Next one. A writer who you feel needs a complete anthology of their work. And for that one, I chose Louis Untermeyer, who Louis Untermeyer was an anthologist himself, but he was also a poet, which he was known very well for both. But what was remarkable about his anthologies is that he was a pioneer, perhaps maybe even, he was one of the first, if not the first, to release definitive anthologies of American literature, because American literature did not begin to be studied until the 1920s, and when it did, they would rely on Untermeyer's anthologies, and he has anthologized some of his works, but not in their entirety, because he continued to write up until his death, and he lived a long life. But I have here 7 of his collections: Challenge, These Times, including Horace, The New Adam, Roast Leviathan, Burning Bush, and Roast Leviathan, and Adirondack Cycle, which is only 3 poems, but this was published by Random House. And these 3, I'm pretty sure, are originals. And then the more familiar Modern American Poetry, which is a traditional anthology that he contributed to, but it's mainly other people's poems. Louis Untermeyer also had developed a bit of a soured impression after he was blacklisted, which he had just joined What's My Line, and a year into the show, they had to remove him because of the speculation that he was involved in Marxist activities. But when he was tapped to be poet laureate during the Kennedy administration, it was sort of a redeeming factor, and I think that he was able to settle himself back into the literary world. But I feel that he needs a complete anthology of his work, and it would definitely be a project that I would be interested in engaging. I don't necessarily agree with his politics, but I think that he is important to American literature with his personal contributions and his anthologies that he put together. And he also corresponded with Robert Frost, so they were somewhat of contemporaries to one another. Next question, is a translated work you feel deserves recognition? And while I think it is quite an established work, especially in Europe, I have to say Demian by Hermann Hesse, which I think is my favorite of Hesse's novels that I've read thus far. I've read Siddhartha and Narcissus and Goldman. Siddhartha is probably the Hesse novel that has the most acclaim in America. But this one is just extraordinary. This particular version was translated by Michael Roloff and Michael Lebeck, but the content in here really plays with the idea of what it is to be a human being and to live your life, and the challenges the questions of good and evil. And it really, I think that it really had an impact with the way that I thought, and I think that this was Hesse's coming to age. This proved to be quite a turning point in Hesse's very own life. Originally, this was published under the name of Emil Sinclair. Nowadays, it's almost always released as a book by Hermann Hesse. Just that statement on page 97 about the things that the people that disturb us the most are the ones that possess a trait that is similar or the same as ours, and that those that do not, it does not bother us. There's just so much to think about there, because it's just the way that you, the way that one views their enemies. There's, in many cases, there's a sense of jealousy or a trait within them that serves as a flaw for the subject at hand. Next question. A work of nonfiction you feel needs to be studied. And for that, I went with He Wanted the Moon by Dr. Perry Baird's daughter, Mimi Baird, with help from Eve Claxton. And I think that this just gave me a greater understanding of manic depression, which is now known as bipolar disorder. And I have to read the essay that Dr. Perry Baird wrote about manic depression. I want to say I printed it out or downloaded it, but it's the name of the article is Biochemical Component of the Manic Depressive Psychosis, which was published in the Journal of Neurosis and Mental Disease. Next question. If you can teach any 5 literature-based classes, whether they exist in some way, shape, or form, or would be something that you create, what would they be? And for that, I chose Swiss literature, which I think that there's so many Swiss works and writers that they deserve recognition far more than they actually do in America. And I have a bit of an enthusiasm for Swiss culture. Some form of American literature, whether it be the American Renaissance, 20th century American literature, or American poetry of some sort. Novels in translation, I think that would be an interesting class to teach. Horror fiction as a genre, which would be horror from its beginning roots, all the way until horror in today's literature, whether it be, it would be Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, and then just so many others that even the splatterpunk genre would be part of that curriculum. And I think Polish literature would be another interesting class to teach, especially Polish poetry and the reflection that it has on its history. In particular, the 20th century, because Poland went through a lot as far as invasions and conflicts with Russia are concerned. If I was going to teach non-literature classes, there would be two clear subjects that I would have in mind, and that is U.S. presidential history and the history of cheese. Those would be two history classes, but if those kind of classes ever existed, I would love to teach them, or I would love to take them. I was thinking neurodivergence in literature and psychology in literature as well, but there's a lot of assumptions that would be made, and a lot of it would be taught on assumption. For instance, someone like Franz Kafka, I have a feeling he had some kind of condition, but there was no clinical diagnosis. It would be interesting to figure out. That would be a research topic, but I picked the number 5, and so before I get too carried away on question 10, I'm going to ask the last question, and that is, who do you tag? I'm going to tag 19 people to do this. I tag Steve from Steve Donahue because this tag has his name written all over it. Another one is Adrian from Strip Covered Lit because I think Blue Jean Scholar when I think of Adrian from Strip Covered Lit. Jess from Garden Scriptorium, Rebecca from Rapacious Reads, Mike from Catalyst Reads, Adam from Adam Marcel. Adam is one of the newest members of the Booktube community. Danielle from This Is Danielle. Ellie from Earl Grey Books. Sean from Sean the Book Maniac. Lena from Ruby Soup with Pearl Juice. Tessa from Tessa's Library. Sue and Megan from the Restricted Section. Gretchen and Michaela from Betwixt the Books. Mark from Richardson Reads. Sarah from Gregor Reads. Laura from Laura Pora. Diana from Diana in Color. JD from JD Archer or JD's Journeys. And Dr. Bordelon from Literary Gladiators. And anybody else that wants to do this tag, I highly encourage you to do the Scholars Book tag. There were so many people that I wanted to tag, so if you want to do it, I highly encourage you to do so, and I'll be sure to check it out. Thank you for tuning into this video, and for now, keep reading.